Hi, Adam Harris here. This is the latest episode of the Leadership Lab. I'm here with Simon Craddock, CEO of Port Taranaki. Simon, it seems as if there's a huge amount going on at the port. I'd love for you to share the top 2 or 3 things that are going on at the moment.
Sure. I mean, the port's a really interesting place at the moment, and I think the context is the whole transition in the energy economy. For us, we are a port that does 5 million tonnes of trade, and 3 million of that is related to energy. So it's oil and gas, condensate, and methanol, which is the largest component. Now, I think we're in a place where we realise the importance of petrochemicals for our energy balance, but on a longer term time frame, as we decarbonise, that's going to become less and less. So we realise that's going to be a smaller part of our business in future, and we are committed to doing what we can to support that business in the meantime as it forms part of the transition. But looking forward, the rise of renewables, and particularly offshore renewables, is incredibly exciting for our business and I think our region.
So Simon, the port here is really close to the city, within the boundaries. What does that mean for how you kind of work and operate, and also the involvement with the community?
It's a really important question for us. We need to be very conscious of our social licence. We are right within the limits of the city. So we work very hard on making sure that we're a good custodian of the environment. There are a range of things we do. We look after some of the community facilities like the boat ramp, fishing jetty. We contribute to the sports fishing club, the yacht club. We have an environmental program, monitoring program in the port. We clean out invasive species such as Indaria, which is an invasive seaweed. So we're very conscious of that, and we do operate a noisy, smelly, sometimes hazardous business in close proximity to residents. So we need to make sure we're doing the best we can there.
So this week's quite an important week because we've got visitors coming through on a cruise ship. So love for you to kind of talk about what's happened in the run up to that, and then the plans for kind of the future.
Sure. Well, cruise has been gone for about more than 2 years, so we're very excited to have the return of cruise, and there are 4 ships coming this season. The cruise industry on the West Coast is not nearly as big as the East Coast. They have around 80, but we've got the Seabourn Odyssey coming in next Wednesday. It'll have about 450 passengers on board, so really great to see them coming through, and that ship will be returning in March next year, and there are 2 much larger cruise ships coming through in the meantime.
What does that mean for the region?
Well, so it's a huge opportunity for the region. Cruise is really restarting. When you learn a little bit about how cruise works, onshore product needs to be created a long way in advance of the cruise actually arriving. So there's an opportunity for businesses in Taranaki to get involved in cruise and create product which actually gets sold on board prior to the ship arriving. So it's great to see it coming back, and I think what the cruise industry tells us is that there is a bit of a shortage of land-based product for them in the region at the moment.
So what's the future for the port? What's in the pipeline that's looking really exciting?
Well, there's a huge amount for us. So supporting our current customers is number one, and looking forward to the future. So if I talk a little bit about the renewable energy space, there are a number of developers who are the prime movers in the renewable energy space who are looking to invest significantly in offshore wind, projects that are $4-5 billion and of enormous scale. We want to support them as much as we can out of this region. I think when you talk to them, their goal is to initially consent their projects. So they need government support to create a regulatory environment where they can consent their projects, finance their projects and get them going. We're a part of that story in that they want to build the projects very quickly, and for that they need a lot of infrastructure. As they look at us now, there's not enough infrastructure there. So I think many of them are looking at multi-port strategies, which will take longer. So for us, it's, well, how can we support that industry? How can we bring as much of that activity to Taranaki as we can, and it makes sense? And obviously we play a supporting role in that equation, but that's occupying a lot of our time right now.
So you've been in the role just over a year?
Yes.
How many people does the port employ, and does that kind of fluctuate?
Yeah, well, we have about 115 permanent employees, but I like to say the port team is about 135. That includes some contractors. So that's our core group. We don't operate most of the port. The port is operated by stevedores and marshalling companies, and there are a larger number of people involved in those businesses. So on the port, on any given day, including truck drivers, we could have 500 or 700 people on the port.
Health and safety?
Health and safety is a massive issue.
Yeah.
So obviously there's been a big focus on health and safety in this past calendar year after some very nasty accidents at other ports. So there was a ministerial review led, and we've been through that process. It's fleshed up a couple of issues which we've been addressing. I think overall it's been a very positive process, and it's brought the different organisations on the port closer together. The big issue on the port is working with what are called overlapping duties, where we all have a responsibility for health and safety. It's not just the port company. And I think in the media, when there's an accident on the port, it tends to come across as the port company, but in fact there are various PCBUs or entities responsible for safety on the port, and we have an important coordinating role.
Wow, that's when we think about that, the extent of those numbers on site at any one time, and the complexity of those people. That's wow. Thank you for sharing. Your journey is quite an interesting one, because you've had an extensive career and you've been kind of doing governance roles, and then you decided to come back into being a CEO. I'd love for you to kind of share that journey.
Oh, it's a great question, and I'm actually speaking to the IOD about that at the dinner coming up shortly, so I have to prepare that.
Keep it brief.
Exact question. But look, I mean, it's been a very interesting journey. I put it down to indecision. I started out as a consultant, I moved into management. I had a governance and consulting portfolio, now I'm back in management. And look, I certainly haven't planned it that way, and I've enjoyed every facet of my career. I think they're great for different reasons, but I was probably a terrible director and was always trying to leap the fence back to the management side of the table, so that's what I've done.
So now, being back on the other side of the fence, how are you keeping the other side at bay?
Yeah, well, look, I certainly have an appreciation of the challenge of being on the other side of the table.
Yep.
And my board is incredibly supportive, and I see just the right skills I need there at the moment, so it's great. And I understand the challenge of that job, trying to add value, not having as much information as the management team. It is a difficult task, so I'm very appreciative.
So what was it about this role and the region that kind of attracted you to kind of apply and then make the decision to come?
Yeah, well, we knew the region, we knew the town. We used to come down here windsurfing actually many years ago, and loved it, and have some very good friends here. So it was a possibility, and then of course the role came up, and I think it's just a fascinating time to be in transport, logistics and energy. There is such an incredible transition going on. So it was a great opportunity. And in terms of lifestyle, we have a young family. It's a great place for them. I'd like to say I was enjoying the environment a little more than I have been in the last year, but of course getting into a big new role really requires that focus. So I'm looking forward to this summer.
And what differences have you noticed for you and the family kind of living here as opposed to Auckland?
Well, apart from today, I've been arriving at meetings early, some time adjusting for traffic, but I mean, it's just, we're so privileged here. I mean, we can get around so easily, the environment is incredible. I've moved from Auckland. I love Auckland. Auckland's a wonderful city as well, but you have to be a bit strategic about where you live and work, otherwise there are some big commutes.
So as you reflect on your career to this point, what's the role that really stood out for you, where maybe you kind of went from being a manager to being a leader?
I think the interesting transitions I've had were going from working for a consulting firm where it was all about having the right ideas and the smarts behind the plan, into a corporate environment at Air New Zealand where I realised that was only 20% of the problem. 80% of it was getting it done, engaging the people, and I was very fortunate with the mentors and challenges that I had through Air New Zealand, so that was incredibly formative. Leaving there in 2014 and heading off into a world of governance and consulting, I really enjoyed getting back into, being a contributor to individual projects and then lifting the lid on lots of different businesses through my governance roles. So it's great that I can bring it all back together now in the CEO role at the board.
Let's talk about mentors and coaches then.
Sure.
Who's influenced you over the years?
I've had there've been a huge number. If I was to name some names on the way through, I mean, I think moving into Air New Zealand was an incredible time for me. That was off off the back of the Ansett collapse, and the airline was not in good shape. It was really a turnaround situation. And at that stage, Ralph Norris was running the business. It was great to understand Ralph's philosophy around the business, and the board made some very important decisions around investing in people and the culture of the business. And that was really executed by the following CEO, by Rob Fife, and I worked directly for Vanessa Stoddart, who was the head of people and culture. So she's been an incredible mentor to me on the way through. Also my boss at Air New Zealand Engineering, a guy called Chris Nassenstein, who worked all around the world and was a real specialist in that area. I've certainly appreciated, you need to have the heart but also the expertise, and I've certainly learnt a lot from those two.
Simon, you mentioned this aspect of heart. What does that mean for you as a leader?
Right, yeah, it's a great question. I learnt a lot about that at Air New Zealand, and I mentioned Rob before. Rob and the board at the time invested in people and they invested in product, and it was a virtuous circle. The staff were proud of the product, gave them a great work environment, their service improved, and it was an incredible thing, I think, to see that company turn around. So I've learned from that, and I think I've taken away a sort of a customer service ethos. But everyone in the business comes to work to do a good job. I don't believe anyone comes to do a bad job, and in some cases it's about management getting out of the way a little bit. I can certainly see at the port we've got an incredible group of people who want to do a great job, but we are quite dispersed and quite siloed. So I think my job, or an important aspect of my job, is to connect everyone and enable all the good ideas that are there to come to the surface, allow everyone to have pride in what they do, and project that to customers and other stakeholders.
If I went into the port and I said, can you describe Simon as a leader? Or what do you think some of the things that people would say about you?
So my leadership side, what would people say? Well, I'd like to think they'd say that I was authentic and I leave them room to bring their best to work. Being the CEO is about creating the strategy and communicating the strategy. So I want to make sure everyone knows what our strategy is, and they know where their contribution docks to that strategy. I think communication is probably not my strongest suit. I need help with that, but I like to make sure I put the framework in place and create the room for my managers to make sure they are bringing the story to their people and bringing the story back from their people in terms of what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, I think it's been quite clear. You talk about communication, it feels as if the external communication seems to be a lot more prevalent over the last kind of 12 months since you've been on board. Is that a conscious decision?
It's certainly a deliberate move to make sure we're communicating with the community, making sure we're trying to enhance our social license. There are a lot of great things we're doing inside the port, but unless we tell the story, no one knows. So actually, it's incumbent on us to be better communicators, and we're progressing.
Air New Zealand, you were there for quite a while. What is it about that company that allowed you to kind of learn so much? Was it the DNA which was already existing, or was it the leaders that were there at the time that you were there?
I think it's the leaders that were there, and certainly I've been on a journey and evolving. And if I just reflect back on the eras, Rob and Vanessa and Chris, that era was all about the customer and all about the culture, and that was a great era, although pretty economically challenged. We had the GFC, we had high fuel, so results were not great. Christopher came in with a much stronger commercial lens, which I think was what the business needed at that time, and results went very, very well. And in an airline there are all sorts of external factors that come to play. You pat yourself on the back for what you do internally, but there are a lot of external factors as well. So it was great to see different leadership eras in the same business.
So you come into a new role. Let's take this one. 12 months ago, come in. What does an incoming CEO do to kind of assess and analyse what's going on, the things that are working, the things that need kind of slight changes? I'd love for you to just kind of share some of the things that you did.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's like drinking through the fire hose, but particularly because I've changed industry. I've gone from aviation to marine, which I knew nothing about, but I tell myself it's all regulated transport, and there are a lot of things that rhyme. But it is about learning about the people, learning about the industry, particularly learning about the customers. We need to know the role we play in our customers' journey in their supply chain, and I think we've got to put a lot of effort into that.